Tonight on CBC Vancouver News. Stepping down.
I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader.
After 9 years in power and more recent calls to leave, the Prime Minister says it is time for him to go. Now, who wants to replace him?
I am actively considering it. I haven't made that decision yet, but I will need to make it obviously pretty soon.
Plenty of names are being suggested, some from BC. And a self-styled childbirth activist is under police investigation over the death of an infant on Vancouver Island.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us on a monumental day of change in Canadian politics. After 9 years in power, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has announced he plans to resign. He will stay on as the federal Liberal Party leader until they select a new one, a race that kicked into high gear moments after he spoke. Ashley Burke has more on Trudeau's dramatic turn.
A major moment in Canadian history.
Last night over dinner, I told my kids about the decision that I'm sharing with you today.
The Prime Minister, who's long resisted calls to resign, now says he'll step down.
I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader.
Justin Trudeau addressing the nation from outside his home at Rideau Cottage, repeatedly describing himself as a fighter.
Every bone in my body has always told me to fight because I care deeply about Canadians.
But staying on as a leader is a fight he couldn't win.
It has become obvious to me with the internal battles that I cannot be the one to carry the Liberal standard into the next election.
Those internal battles bruising and relentless, growing calls from his own MPs to resign only intensifying after last month's stunning resignation of his Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland.
Despite best efforts to work through it, Parliament has been paralyzed for months after what has been the longest session of a minority parliament in Canadian history.
Trudeau said it took the holidays and long talks with his family to come to this decision.
Removing me from the equation as the leader who will fight the next election for the Liberal Party should also decrease the level of polarization that we're seeing right now in the House.
He's now calling for a reset. The Governor-General has approved his request to prorogue Parliament, putting government business on hold until the end of March, while his party holds a competitive race for its next leader. Freeland, former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney, former BC Premier Christy Clark, and several cabinet ministers among those viewed as possible contenders.
We have to go in elections.
But opposition parties are vowing to try and bring down the government with non-confidence votes after that.
New Democrats will be voting against this government for an election where Canadians will have a choice.
They want to protect their pensions and paycheck by sweeping their hated leader under the rug months before an election to trick you and then do it all over again.
The Liberals hope Trudeau's departure changes everything and can rescue the party from some of the worst polling it's seen since Trudeau became Liberal leader more than a decade ago and before Canadians head to the polls sometime this year. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
Now, the announcement outside Ottawa's Rideau Cottage reverberated with voters, politicians, and experts here in BC. As Bill Puri reports, many British Columbians have clear thoughts on the tumultuous end to the Prime Minister's time in power and who might want the job from here.
There's little surprise in BC reaction to Justin Trudeau's decision to step down as Prime Minister.
That sounds like a good idea, Justin.
That's good news, I think, for all of us.
I think it's something we've all been waiting for.
It's been clear for a while that without change, the Liberals could have been trounced in BC in the next federal election.
I think British Columbians, as well as most Canadians, had tired of Justin Trudeau and wanted him to step down.
At least one member of Trudeau's BC caucus said the Prime Minister had become detached from the sentiments of everyday Canadians.
I could see things that weren't happening as well as they should have, or things that we missed doing. And I think that those are probably the nature of the disconnect that I was talking about.
Many British Columbians who voted for Trudeau in the past say they had no similar plan for the future.
I think he did a great job during COVID, but he can't rest on that laurels, and he hasn't done a whole lot in the last 2 or 3 years.
And let somebody else take over the party if they have any hope at all of continuing on.
I think we need to just a change overall.
BC Premier David Eby took to social media with a message. While we didn't always agree, I want to thank Justin Trudeau for serving as Prime Minister during some very difficult times our country has faced. With the Canadian government effectively in caretaker mode, many voters are focused on what comes next.
If he had made this decision much earlier, the Liberals would have a better chance of reorganizing.
If Chrystia Freeland was voted in as the Liberal leader, I would vote Chrystia Freeland.
BC names are among those circulating as potential candidates for the Liberal leadership. Jonathan Wilkinson from North Vancouver is on that list.
I am actively considering it. I haven't made that decision yet, but I will need to make it obviously pretty soon.
So is former BC Premier Christy Clark. Trudeau's resignation has put her squarely back in the political spotlight. Last fall, Clark publicly expressed interest in leading the federal Liberal Party, but noted at the time the job wasn't open. Now that it is, Clark wrote on social media, "This is the biggest opportunity in over a decade that we've had to grow our party and welcome new Liberals. Let's seize it." Political experts say what happens next depends entirely on who replaces Justin Trudeau and if that reignites any enthusiasm for federal Liberals in British Columbia. Belle Peary, CBC News, Vancouver.
Now, with Trudeau on the way out, Parliament has been prorogued. That freeze is expected to last until late March. As John Hernandez explains, that move has been used by past governments during times of political crises.
Justin Trudeau is stepping down, but that doesn't spell the end of Canada's current government. The Governor-General approved Trudeau's request to prorogue government. The move gives the Liberals time to look for a new leader without risking a non-confidence vote. At its core, prorogation is a tool that allows the Prime Minister to press pause on all parliamentary activity without dissolving government.
It's a parliamentary norm. Really, it's meant for other kinds of circumstances like, if there's a war, a national emergency, security emergency, there's all sorts of things you could imagine that prorogation would be necessary.
This political scientist says it's become a controversial political practice over the years. In 2008, it was used by Stephen Harper as his opposition leaders attempted to form a coalition to unseat him. Prorogation stalled Parliament, and the coalition deal fell apart.
It's a pretty dramatic move. Harper did it in 2008, and again faced a lot of criticism. It's worth noting that Trudeau also mentioned early on in his tenure as Prime Minister that he condemned that use of prorogation.
Justin Trudeau prorogued Parliament in 2020, which suspended a probe into the We Charity scandal. Jerram says by pausing Parliament now, the Liberals buy some valuable time.
The Liberal Party has some time to choose a new leader. Not as much time as they may like. We would assume that that leader has to be in place a little bit before March 24th, because when Parliament resumes, the objective of the Liberal Party would probably be to try to survive a confidence vote.
Prorogation also halts bills moving through Parliament. Legislation now at risk includes Canada's Online Harms Act, a bill targeting social media companies, and the First Nations Clean Water Act. Those bills would need to be reintroduced to move forward, a tall task for a government whose future is far from certain. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
To other news now, CBC News has learned a Vancouver Island woman who calls herself a childbirth activist is the subject of an RCMP investigation into the death of a newborn last year. As Jason Proctor reports, it is not the first time Gloria LeMay has found herself under legal scrutiny.
Gloria LeMay has been making headlines for 40 years as a childbirth activist and self-appointed defender of midwives, and as a defendant, first charged with criminal negligence in the death of a fetus in a home birth in 1985, in a case that went all the way to Canada's Supreme Court where she was acquitted. And now, in 2025, she's back in the public eye, with civil proceedings brought by BC's College of Midwives, which claims LeMay is under RCMP investigation for criminal negligence causing the death of a baby which died in hospital last January, 10 days after being born unable to breathe. Those allegations are contained in BC Supreme Court documents filed by the regulator, which says LeMay's engagement in the practice of midwifery is not only unlawful, it is a societal menace. LeMay hasn't been charged with any crime, and the RCMP wouldn't comment on the status of their investigation. Her lawyer declined to comment to CBC, and LeMay has filed an application to stay the proceedings against her. She claims a search of her house after the baby died breached her charter rights. Here's what allegedly happened. According to notes filed in court by a lawyer with the college, the baby's father told a nurse the baby was gasping at birth, just lying there. He said LeMay was saying she's fine, but he could tell something wasn't right. They called emergency services, who rushed the newborn to Nanaimo, where she was put on a ventilator. The baby was later transferred to a neonatal intensive care unit in Victoria, where she died January 6, 2024, 14 hours after being removed from life support. According to the court documents, the father claimed that as they were leaving for hospital, LeMay said, "If anyone asks, tell them my name is Catherine." So who is Gloria LeMay? On her website, she says she wants her gravestone to read, "Birth attendant and mother, she spoke up for babies." And on another blog post, she calls birth a normal life process. She first came to national attention in 1985 after she and another woman were charged with criminal negligence after attending a birth where the fetus died in the birth canal. Now, in that case, Canada's top court said they weren't guilty because a fetus is not a person, and she celebrated that decision.
So great, yeah.
In 1995, Gloria LeMay was found in contempt of court for refusing to answer questions at a coroner's inquest into the death of another newborn, and at the time, she spoke to CBC Radio.
I think even the most anti-midwife person in this province has to accept the fact that right from the very beginning of this case, there has been extreme anti-midwife bias.
Now, midwifery has been regulated in BC since 1998, but LeMay has never been licensed here. In another blog post, she said she was fearful regulation would change the alternative nature of the profession. So the regulator has had this injunction against her acting as a midwife since 2000. She went to jail for 2 months in 2002 for violating that order by participating in 10 home births. In the current case, the college claims it's undeniable she could lose her liberty again if she is found in contempt. Jason Proctor, CBC News, Vancouver.
One person has been sent to hospital after an apartment fire in Kelowna earlier in the day. Firefighters say the blaze was contained to one unit on the 3rd floor and 3 people were rescued. Crews say 18 people were displaced and again, one sent to hospital with smoke inhalation. They say 4 suites were damaged by smoke and most people on the first 2 floors will be able to return home. It's not yet clear what sparked the fire.
Just one thing with these older buildings, there's probably smoke detectors in the building, but to have their fire alarm systems serviced diligently and make sure everything's in working order makes a huge difference.
Stephanie Hungerford joins us for a look at the weather. Foggy start across the south coast, but then that changed, didn't it?
It sure did. It was very sunny, really across the province, although we did have some fog in the lower mainland. And then tomorrow morning, we're going to see a lot of precipitation coming into the terrace area, freezing rain and really high winds. Tomorrow night, we're going to see more rain for Vancouver, and we're going to see snow for the interior. And then this is going to clear up a little bit for Wednesday, which is nice. Some rain again on Thursday, but we're really hoping for a lot of sun this weekend. And tomorrow evening, 6, overnight cloudy. Tomorrow, a little bit of sun, but a lot of fog again, so we need to be really careful when we're driving into work tomorrow.
Very good advice. Thanks, Stephanie. It is the resignation resonating from coast to coast to coast. After the break, more on the fallout from Justin Trudeau's decision to step down. Stay with us. Returning now to our top story, Justin Trudeau has announced after 9 years as Prime Minister and growing calls to leave that he is now ready to resign. Trudeau says he will stay on until a new Liberal leader is chosen. So what comes next? For some insights into that, we turn to Shachi Kurl, president of the Angus Reid Institute and also one of the busiest people today across the country. It's been a long day. It's been a while. Safe to say, and you had some polling on this when we last spoke, Justin Trudeau is not leaving on a high note at this point.
No, he's not. He's leaving on his personal lowest note. His approval had sunk to a nadir of 22% in terms of approval, and that was an all-time low for him. Important to remember, it's not like the all-time lowest of lows. Pretty sure Brian Mulroney had worse numbers than him when he left. But it wasn't trending in a good direction. Not by a long shot. I think more concerning for Liberals, for the Prime Minister, for his caucus, for fundraisers, donors. That white-knuckle moment was really the fact that the absolute floor in terms of vote intent was down to 13%. which, if that had held, would have resulted basically in one of the worst showings for the party in modern history. So when I looked at that data in and around New Year's Eve, and just before we put it out, it was like, oh, yeah, this isn't good for the Prime Minister.
No, and obviously for the party as well. Yeah. This does spark a leadership race. What do we know about, in terms of data that you've collected, public perception around some of the big candidates? We think about Chrystia Freeland, Dominic LeBlanc, Christy Clark here in BC, among other names.
So there's a couple of different ways to look at it. First of all, from a name recognition factor, people like Freeland and Carney are going to have a bit of a head start on that. But there are other candidates such as Clark who may have a bit of a head start around organizing and sort of doing the mechanics of signing up members or trying to build support, right? Trying to do the operational work in that. One of the things that I think is really key here is that you've got potential successors who can lift the party up. They can provide some altitude, some loft. They can potentially, if they were to take on the job, they have the potential to boost the party's fortunes. But based on what we're seeing, it's not enough to really be in a contention space with the federal Conservatives, who are polling at something 40+% right now.
And that's been consistent over a number of months, hasn't it?
It has been, and just been sort of ticking up over time. So if you're somebody who's trying to get some momentum going for a newly revitalized Liberal Party, yes, you might inject 8, 10, 12, 20% enthusiasm into vote intent for the party. But what you have to do is actually be in a place where you can go head-to-head with Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives and actually surge through. That, in a 4-month period, is a pretty tall hill to climb. Never say never, but history tells us right now, not looking so likely.
And particularly when they have such an advantage when it comes to fundraising. We've heard about that. Lastly, we appreciate your time. If you're Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, what are you watching for in the coming weeks? And are you changing your strategy because it may have been planned around fighting an election against Justin Trudeau?
My thought is that chances are Conservative strategists had more than one strategy in mind. I think the what if Trudeau steps down factor was always there. I don't think the Conservatives are too worried about, at this moment, too tremendously worried about whoever they'll face. I think the bigger liability for them is a screw up on part of Pierre Poilievre or on part of his caucus, basically just, saying inconvenient and politically unpalatable or unacceptable things. It's really right now about message control and not making unforced errors.
Shachi Kurl, president of the Angus Reid Institute, we always appreciate your time, and we will call you again.
Oh, goody. Thanks, Dan.
You're welcome. Thank you. Well, the Vancouver region woke up to fog down low. Up high, it was a beautiful, sunny, clear sky. Plenty of snow enthusiasts enjoying the day high up on Grouse Mountain. Warm daytime temperatures up on the hills, high of 6 degrees, and only a limited number of runs open today. Stephanie Hungerford has your BC-wide weather forecast coming up. Back to our top story now as attention turns to the federal Liberal leadership race on a tight timeline. The growing list of names believed to be interested in the job includes 7 current and former cabinet ministers, as well as a former BC premier, a former MP and businessman, and a former governor of the Bank of Canada. In other words, this could be a crowded affair. Kate McKenna has more on what we know about the race for the next Liberal leader.
With Justin Trudeau's resignation, the race to replace him is snapping into focus.
Today is tantamount to the starting gun of the leadership race. Before long, we're going to be consumed with that.
Nearly a dozen Liberals are rumored to want the top job. Among them, former BC Premier Christy Clark and former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney. He's called dozens of MPs since Boxing Day.
Mark Carney's a great candidate from every perspective. He's a centrist. He is smart.
Former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland's cabinet resignation kick-started the events that led to Trudeau's resignation. She's not ruling out running for leader.
I think Chrystia Freeland is certainly a viable leadership candidate. She has a lot to offer, as do many others have a lot to offer.
A source says Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc is very likely to run for leader. Other high-profile cabinet ministers said to be considering running include House Leader Karina Gould, Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, and Transport Minister Anita Anand.
I know from across the country there's a number of Liberals interested in running.
But whoever becomes leader will be inheriting an unpopular party weeks before the government could fall.
This is yet another seeming existential fork in the road for the Liberal Party. We can't get 20% or less in an election campaign. We have to run the best campaign possible.
There's a lot of baggage that comes with the party and the current government, as in the Trudeau government that we've had for several terms.
The Liberal Party hasn't announced how or when the next leader will be chosen.
There will be a leadership process and the rules will unfold over the coming weeks.
But they've got a tight deadline. Parliament is prorogued until March 24th. An election could happen soon after.
Those who are wringing their hands saying we don't have enough time, we have time. I would like to see a leadership contest go 60, 70 days. Let's end it, say, the end of March. Let candidates come forward, present their vision.
Kate McKenna reporting. It is back to school and work for many Canadians after the Christmas holiday break. For the nearly 50,000 employees of Amazon in this country, it also means a return to full-time work in the office. And it is not the only employer ending hybrid arrangements this year. More now from Nisha Patel.
Amazon employees around the world are heading back to the office 5 days a week. The tech giant is ending its popular post-pandemic policy that allowed staff to work remotely 2 days a week.
People are very upset, and we've signed a few letters and done a few events to try to get more support.
Workers like CJ Felly in Seattle are speaking out. He thinks employees are happier and more productive when they can work from home.
I like the flexibility it provides, and I like that it breaks up the monotony of a workday.
CEO Andy Jassy suggested the change will boost collaboration and company culture, but employees say Amazon hasn't provided data to back that up. Amazon is one of the most high-profile companies to roll back remote work entirely. AT&T and Dell have just made similar moves.
The longer that you've had this hybrid remote experience, the tougher it will be to pivot back to, somewhat of a normal in-office work experience, for sure.
Each of the frameworks.
This Calgary fintech firm has had employees back on site for several years.
And we've really felt that, having people in office really helped with their mental health.
About 19% of Canadians currently work mostly from home. That's more than double pre-pandemic levels.
We're seeing fewer options in the market for 100% remote. We're also seeing fewer options in the market that are 100% in an office. So hybrid is definitely becoming the theme for most organizations.
A flexible workplace is a big draw for employees. 44% of Canadian workers surveyed prefer hybrid work.
Well, I think there's an advantage to whatever allows your workforce to be fully engaged. And today, that appears to be a form of hybrid.
Some economists suggest forcing workers back to the office can have serious costs for companies, lowering employee satisfaction and prompting some to quit. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
Marine researchers off BC's coast recorded an apparent act of grief recently. A mother orca was once again spotted carrying the body of a dead calf. As Yvette Brent explains, it is the latest reminder of the pressures facing one particular group of killer whales.
The limp body of a dead calf pushed to the surface again and again by its mother.
Just this immense sadness that how could this have happened again?
This scientist says it's the second female calf this orca has lost.
To see it happen again, that was a gut punch. It was just like, we need this calf more than anything else.
6 years ago, this same female, known as J35 or Taliqua, relentlessly pushed her dead calf to the surface for 17 days. It caught people's attention.
We can relate to killer whales on so many levels. And I think in some respects, we can almost see ourselves in them. And as a result, we can feel the grief of what it is to lose a newborn.
Her pod of about 30 whales lives on salmon, hunting near the San Juan Islands. Unlike transient orcas that sometimes share territory, they do not eat seals or porpoise.
The pregnancies that fail are in nutritionally stressed female.
The southern resident orcas number only 72. They struggle to find enough Chinook salmon and are hurt by contaminants and boat noise.
Of the calves we ever observe, only about 80% of them make it through their first year.
Inbreeding in the small 30-member pod is further weakening calf health, according to researchers who say pods ideally should number in the hundreds.
We are, extremely disappointed and devastated that, she's lost another calf.
But one bit of good news came, a New Year's surprise for observers, a new calf that is thriving.
All signs are good so far. The calf seems energetic, is keeping up with everyone, is swimming strongly.
It was, again, a surprise. And so to have this news come forward on the same day was really astounding.
And especially if it's a female, a strong glimmer of hope for a pod on the edge of disappearing. Yvette Brent, CBC News, Vancouver.
A new online tool created at the University of Victoria is helping people better understand the impact of their drinking habits just in time for dry January. As Saurabh Sandhu reports, researchers warn drinking alcohol is one of the leading causes of cancer, and some want warning labels on all beverages.
How much alcohol is safe to drink? It's an age-old question that can now be answered through the help of technology.
This is the first sort of calculator in the entire world where you can get your kind of risks and the benefits of drinking.
NAMI is part of a group of researchers at the University of Victoria who developed a new online tool where people can enter information about their drinking habits and calculate the risk of several alcohol-related diseases.
For people to be mindful about their drinking and can maybe consider drinking a little bit less.
The launch of the website comes as the U.S. Surgeon General calls for guidelines on alcohol consumption limits to be reassessed in that country.
The research has been building for years now. We've had more and more evidence that keeps accumulating year by year. That's giving us a strong connection, a causal link between alcohol and cancer.
He believes alcohol should have a clear label warning consumers about health risks. Researchers in BC say it's a move Canada should consider as well.
The idea that you can have more information on a can of peas than a bottle of whiskey is frankly pretty ridiculous.
In 2017, Yukon had a pilot project that put cancer warning labels on bottles of alcohol. But just weeks into the project, the Yukon government pulled the labels after pushback from the Canadian alcohol industry. Years later, the idea is still receiving mixed reaction.
I don't think the warning label is a deterrent.
I think putting at least a warning label might be a good idea.
Alcohol kills more people than smoking in America every year. I think it's hypocritical not to do it for one to the other. I'd just be interested to see any studies before and see does it even work.
Does it work? NAMI says it could make a difference.
We surveyed 900 people across Canada in the development of this website, and we had focus groups. People don't want to be told what to do, but they do want good information.
He says he understands drinking has become a way of socializing, but hopes the new online tool can help empower more people to make informed choices. Saurabh Sandhu, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, on the note, it is that time of year again when people, some, give up alcohol for a month, others rush to a gym determined to get in shape or jump on a viral diet they may have seen on social media. For more on how to set a health goal and stick to it, bear that in mind, is our CBC health columnist, Dr. Melissa Lim. Happy New Year to you. Nice to see you.
Likewise.
So what do you think of these health-related New Year's resolutions? And some people get very enthusiastic.
Well, I think now is the best time to make a resolution to change your health. And what better time to make that kind of resolution than early on in the new year? And one of the reasons is because better health improves our happiness. So we know that about 40% of our happiness comes from our lifestyle choices and also our activities. And people who report that they are healthy are about 20% happier on average than other people. But unfortunately, there is a dark side to those New Year's resolutions. It kind of plays into this idea that we are not enough and that we need to completely reinvent ourselves every year. And unfortunately, over 90% of people don't keep their New Year's resolutions. So this can really set us up for disappointment and low mood.
Well, and when people are going from a place of perhaps celebrating a bit and indulging, and they decide, okay, this is the year I'm finally going to get in shape, and they decide to go to the gym, sometimes they don't set those realistic goals. If they say 5 days a week, I'm going to do it, and then by February, they're done. What's a better way to realistically set realistic goals?
Well, for some people, that kind of massive overhaul works. I do have some patients who, for example, say, I'm going to change everything about my life. They manage to do it in a short period of time and have better health for the long term. But these are unicorn patients. The vast majority of us do not work that way when we make a change. And this is actually something that's become more popular and something, in fact, my 10-year-old who's in grade 5 learned to do last year. And they're called SMART goals. So the S stands for example, if you want to exercise more, make it specific. So say I'm going to, after work, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, go to the gym for 30 minutes each time. Make it measurable is the M. So clock those minutes, clock those days that you go to the gym. A is for achievable. You want to make sure this is something that you can do, not saying I'm going to run a marathon next month when you rarely run. That sets you up for a possible injury. R is relevant, so know why you want to make that goal and make sure your plan is going to get you there. And then T is time bound, so making sure that you have time parameters around it and sometimes even circling a date on the calendar where you say, okay, by this date, I'll have achieved this goal.
And quickly, what about the mental health benefits of setting realistic goals?
This can really help because, again, it allows us to achieve a goal that gives us this sense of mastery. And really, one of the goals I think that we should be thinking about, and something a lot of people are thinking about right now, is dry January. You know, as you mentioned, we want to make sure that we're having a healthy diet, exercise, and sleep, but limiting our alcohol intake really does reduce our risk of cancer. And it's something that the U.S. Surgeon General has really been talking about lately, is labeling alcohol as a carcinogen to make sure that people make healthy choices in the new year.
Dr. Melissa Lim, we appreciate your time and your expertise as always. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dan.
Furious winter storm is bearing down on large parts of the U.S. This is the scene in Kentucky where schools have closed early, and in nearby Washington, D.C., a similar wintry scene for the American capital. More on the storm after this. A Canada-wide project to identify Indigenous people and archive images is making headway. Photos from Nova Scotia were recently shared on social media, and members of the Wakwakmak First Nation were able to spot some familiar faces. The CBC's Cassidy Chisholm has the details.
Well, it brings back memories, though, those chairs and...
Brian Gugu had never seen this photo of his young self until November. The photo was taken when he was 5 or 6 years old as a student at an Indian day school in Waggama First Nation. He doesn't remember the photo being taken, but he does know that his name wasn't attached to it until recently.
Being brought out now, it's a good feeling, I guess. Getting to see before I pass, anyway.
Gugu only learned of the photo when it was posted on Facebook by a Library and Archives Canada initiative called Project Naming. The photo is one of thousands of archival images of Indigenous people housed within the National Archives that don't have any names associated with them. But the government agency is trying to change that through community outreach and social media.
If there was a white person in the picture, then that person's name was in the photo, but never the Indigenous person. And we have millions of photos at LAC. Not all of them are digitized, but it really helps to bring dignity and honor back to the photos.
Rosie Sillaboy has been following the project on Facebook and working to name individuals from Waggama. She also grew up in the community and recognized several people in the photos, including Gugu.
To me, identity is very important. I always say it's almost like Canada tried to erase us. So anything like this, it's important to me.
It's a sentiment shared by Janie Michael. Her sister Bernadette died in 2019. A photo of her as a young girl in a classroom was posted by Project Naming in November.
This part is like healing for me, just to be able to talk about it.
Bond says Project Naming has thousands of photos from Mi'kma'ki, still without names. Sillaboy and Gugu both say they'd like to see more photos from their community so they can continue to help identify the people in them. Cassidy Chisholm, CBC News, Waggama First Nation.
Donald Trump's victory is now official. U.S. lawmakers have certified the results of the 2024 presidential election, paving the way for his return to the White House. The peaceful transfer of power was a stark contrast to 4 years ago, when some of his supporters stormed Capitol Hill to try to stop Joe Biden's election win from being certified. More now from Katie Simpson.
Washington, D.C. is unusually quiet for such an important day, and as you can see, part of the reason why, it's been decked by a snowstorm. A winter weather emergency has been declared. Much of D.C. has been shut down with a few exceptions, and that includes Capitol Hill, where lawmakers certified the results of the 2024 presidential election. It was very routine, very orderly, as these things typically are. At times, there were moments that seemed somewhat uncomfortable, as the entire procedure is led by the vice president. Essentially, Kamala Harris had to stand there and certify her own election loss.
Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida has received 312 votes. Kamala D. Harris of the state of California has received 226 votes.
All over Washington, there really is a noticeable increase in security. Before the snow started falling, barricades were put into place, fences were locked in, and that is because of what happened 4 years ago today, when Donald Trump's supporters violently stormed the Capitol and temporarily halted the certification of his election loss. Those supporters had been fed steady lies and misinformation about the election being stolen from him. That didn't happen this go around. Democrats accepted their loss. And while no one was expecting a repeat of what happened on January 6th in 2021, no one wanted to take any sort of chance. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
As we heard in Katie and saw in Katie's report, a massive snowstorm has brought heavy snow and freezing temperatures to parts of the U.S. As Megan Fitzpatrick reports, at least 4 people have died so far in car crashes, and nearly 2,000 flights have been grounded.
A
A friendly Monday morning snowball fight to start the week for residents in Washington, D.C. The U.S. Capitol was among the cities hit with a major storm that made its way up the East Coast with dumps of snow, ice pellets, high winds, and frigid temperatures.
Coolest thing in the world.
It was 100% fun.
Schools were closed, and so were federal government buildings, with the exception of the U.S. Capitol, where lawmakers couldn't take a snow day. They met to certify November's election results. Airports in D.C. and elsewhere in the storm's path tried to keep the runways clear, but hundreds of flights across the U.S. were still delayed and canceled. Several jurisdictions declared states of emergency, including Kansas, Maryland, Kentucky, and New Jersey. People in that state were taking the weather in stride and stocking up on supplies.
I'm enjoying it. I love it down here. Well, it's a great place for it to snow, especially when you don't see it down here too often.
Yep, this is going to get me through. Yep. I have 80 rolls of toilet paper at home, too, so I'm good.
In Kentucky, where the storm hit Sunday and continued dropping freezing rain on Monday, some 90,000 residents had no power. The governor said they're in a race against time to get it back on.
We've got today and part of tomorrow to get power up to as many Kentuckians as we can, because with wind chill, it's going to get dangerously cold.
The roads were still dangerously slick in that state, and residents were asked to stay off them and stay home. Rescue crews helped more than 200 stranded motorists, and 3 deaths due to accidents are being linked to the treacherous roads. As city and state officials cope with the storm's aftermath, fans of winter were making the most of it.
My daughter lost a boot and lost her hat, but she had fun, so even if she doesn't remember it, it's a good experience for sure.
Megan Fitzpatrick, CBC News, Washington.
And Stephanie Hungerford is here with our BC-wide weather forecast, and we have some warnings of our own in our province.
We sure do. Nothing like the U.S., but we do have some warnings in the North Coast. So we have a wind warning in exposed areas. So that's winds that are going to be around 90 kilometers per hour, gusts up to 110 kilometers an hour. We also have a freezing rain warning for Terrace and snow warning for just above. So these are the 3 warnings that we're dealing with in British Columbia for this evening and into tomorrow afternoon. So this precipitation is actually going to start hitting us in the South Coast tomorrow evening. So tomorrow, a little bit cloudy in the lower mainland on the island, and then the rain comes in. The snow is going to hit the interior and up north a little bit, but just kind of ebbing and flowing throughout the week. We're going to see Wednesday, it's clearing up a little bit, mostly cloudy in the lower mainland, a little bit of snow for the interior and up north. And then tomorrow, we're going to see, the temperatures are not so cold. When we have Fort St. John, it was actually minus 18 today. And tomorrow, it's going to be 2 degrees. So there's just such a vast change in weather right now throughout the province. Golden and Cranbrook, still a little cold at -4, but even Kamloops and Kelowna, it's very temperate for this time of year. And for Wednesday, we're going to see much of the same. Fort Nelson, last week, the wind chill was actually -43. And so that's warming up as well up north. So a little bit of a break for everyone who lives up there. Thursday, a little bit colder, but again, the temperatures are really not that cold right now for much of BC. For the 5-day forecast for Metro Vancouver, tomorrow a little bit of sun in the morning. We're going to see a lot of fog again. With Wednesday, we have rain. Thursday, it's going to be cloudy. And then I'm really hoping that this comes true. This Saturday sun. Maybe Sunday as well. So that's what we're looking for.
We won't hold you to it, but we're all hoping for the same thing. Thank you,
They
Stephanie.
might.
Yeah. It's a far cry from the recorder ensembles and bell choirs of the traditional music classroom. How some teachers here in BC are changing it up and why. You'll want to see this.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and this is your CBC Inbox.
The CBC concert series Road to the Junos is in Vancouver. The 5-night series kicks off January 26th at the Pearl. Tickets at cbc.ca/Junos. And on February 4th, CBC's Michelle Elliott moderates the alumni UBC webinar Med Talks. Join the conversation to enhance your understanding of compassionate and comprehensive care. Register at alumni.ubc.ca.
If you peek through the windows of a university music class these days, you may be surprised by what you see. Not a recorder or a bell choir in sight.
And a Vancouver elementary school is changing it up as well. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson takes us back to school for a music class that's very of the time.
Juno-winning musician and broadcaster Shad was once a student at Wilfrid Laurier University. Now he's teaching a course on hip-hop in its music department.
You know, hip-hop is now 50 years old, right? So there's a depth there in terms of history, in terms of a tradition, and in terms of, you know, some serious writing and thinking about what this music is. But while the drums are playing. Nice.
Laurier's Dean of Music says Shad's course is part of the evolution of music programs at universities.
What can we do to be more inclusive of other genres of music and therefore other people who make different kinds of music other than Western, Eurocentral classical music?
Yeah, maybe. Public schools are also taking on this approach. In Vancouver, elementary teacher Michael Mironiak teaches the younger grades to sing and play instruments, but older kids get a music tech program he designed himself.
I think it's always good at this age, especially because they're so young, for them to have as much exposure as possible to a variety of genres, a variety of tools and ways to create.
At this Toronto high school, the newest lot of instruments provided by the charity Music Counts are actually computers, turntables, and consoles, attracting a surge of interest from students. Aspiring DJs and music producers are eager to learn the basics of audio production and sampling and layering of tracks.
I thought I'm interested only in programming, and when I tried this, I found out I like it.
I think it's a creative way to play music.
That's really where the connection is.
Their teacher says it's about more than just keeping them engaged.
Although it might look different than a trumpet or a violin, the type of musical skills that they're able to develop and express, I think, are on the same page. And there's no reason why the curriculum expectations can't be met with things like laptops and controllers and DJ hardware.
As music education takes a cue from the young and lets them explore the genres they feel connected to. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, as well as on YouTube and our website, cbc.ca/BC.
And we'll have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. Good night.